art in games. And here we are with 5 wonderful guests. So Kacper, the first one, he will be moderating the panel discussion. So please welcome him.
Thank you.
Jason, we already met him today. Daniel, we already also know him from today's session. And Tiago, he will be having a session tomorrow, so have a warm welcome. And Andrew, warm welcome for him as well.
So floor is ours. I would just give like a short intro about this. So I also hope that you enjoyed the first Dragon's Days. I hope you enjoyed even more art in games, the track we're trying to create here. And at the end of the day, we're trying to make this panel here like a really cool end for the first day. As we know, we had really good guests here, really talented artists from different companies. And that I figured this out, there's going to be a really good opportunity to talk with those guys and maybe grab some tips and tricks about how to be a better artist or be doing better art. The thing is that you guys are working in really, really different companies, but every single one you worked with are creating really, really great, believable worlds, right? We got Destiny, we got Halo, we got God of War, we got Diablo, we got Overwatch, we got Naughty Dog as Uncharted and The Last of Us. So those games that have those worlds crafted really, really well. So I figured that maybe you're going to give us some tips how to do those things really well, really good. But before we're going to go to this topic, I would just like to know why we're working in games, because probably know that doing games, it's really hard, with different things are making this process really hard. But why games? There are different mediums like movies, TV shows, wherever, that you can use art, but still maybe it's different process, maybe easier process. But as you said, Daniel, you worked in a movie industry before, so maybe you're going to give us insight why you went to work with games.
Yes. Can you hear me? Okay. So to me, the simple reason and the main reason that I'm in games is really the combination of art and technology. I really like solving puzzles. I really like to be challenged to figure out how I'm going to do this. Pretty much every project we start is, because we are a supporting group for different developers, I work with different engines, different tools, so it's always a challenge, and I actually enjoy it, and the combination of being able to do art and be creative, but also be able to work with really smart people and learn from them and just solve problems, like puzzles. I think that's kind of the main thing, and other than just loving to play games, but yeah.
And have this over 23 years, right? Because you said you were doing altogether, like one guy would spend 23 years over.
Yeah, that was stats. The stats for God of War. Yes, we added up all the man hours.
So it's crazy
for casting,
amount of work.
dialogue, sound design, and it all came together to almost 24 working years, I guess.
Yeah, that's crazy, man.
Yeah, that was the largest project by far that I've worked on.
And turned out amazing. Congrats again. It's really good.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we are very happy with it. Yeah.
What about you guys, Andrew? Why in games?
Oh, that's a tricky one. Honestly, I think for me it was just like the dominant way of consuming art growing up, where it was like the coolest thing that I knew existed, so I wanted to do that, but only like doing it for a while was I able to like rationalize it to myself. And probably the best way I can describe it is I absolutely love Dances with Wolves. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It's pretty awesome. But for me, the best part about it is at the very beginning when like the main character gets asked like what does he want to like get reassigned to that remote outpost, and he just goes, I want to see the frontier before it's gone. And for me, I think chasing something that you know is on the absolute bleeding edge is a worthwhile endeavor. You know, it's something worth doing with your life, especially because it touches people on so many levels. It tells stories. It helps people believe in themselves, find friendships, and have great memories together. And at the end of the day, just that idea that you can combine the two and get to do that is fascinating to me, but also the fact that that frontier is not gone yet. There's so much more to be discovered that we're just scratching the surface. If we think we know what video games can do or what they are like, we have no fucking idea. Because, no, for real, like you look at VR, that's just a start. There's AR and whatnot, and then you look at artificial intelligence and people using the game technology for that. Like literally all of that stuff that we've been doing to entertain ourselves all of a sudden literally holds the keys to how humanity is going to interact and work and do all of the things, which is mind-blowing. So if you want to talk frontiers, I honestly cannot think of anything more exciting in the world today than doing this.
And Jason, you guys are also creating tons of different things, big worlds. But why in games?
I think for me it goes back to when I was a kid and I was playing Zelda, and I was like the nerdy kid that no one talked to at school, except they called me because I knew how to get through all the puzzles in Zelda and every other game. And that was where the fascination began. I did want to go into film, but as I was watching the game industry evolve and I'm reading articles about all these other artists that are working in games and how much they touched in that game, I became very intrigued. And then stepping into my previous job was at Terminal Reality, and this was like 19 years ago. And when we were making games back then, everybody kind of did everything. So it was very freeing for me as an artist to be able to work in UI, do particle effects, make an environment, make explosive crates. I mean, it was like I was doing a little bit of everything. And so when that product came out, there was a lot of me in that, and that felt really, really good. And yeah, and I would say it also, the mod community, that was a big thing for me too, just being able to get my hands into tools and starting to learn about all the processes in game development.
And Thiago, what was your story to get here?
Well, when I was a kid, I really liked to play games that would transport me to another dimension, you know, like the immersion. Like when some games are so immersive, you forget you're playing, you know, you're in another space. I was like, I want to have that kind of power, you know, like create like worlds that other people can live and like walk around. And that's what I like about 3D games, because you can walk around, you can look at, and you can explore, you know, it's not a static media like movies or like comics or other types of medias.
So yeah, so we know it's hard, right? But like you, Andrew, you're a technical artist, so you're the guy that tried to make those games actually run on different hardware. So what do you say, like, what are the biggest challenges from like game art point of view?
You know, it's interesting because for me, like, historically, I always fought so hard against the like tech art label, because every place I worked at, no, like I'm here to make art. Every studio I've ever worked at, I started as an artist. I'm gonna make some art, and then what happened is, and I think where our biggest challenges are, despite rendering the pixels, whatnot, the biggest challenges is always the people for me. The only reason I always had to revert back to technical art is there are so many people with such a passion for what we do. And I feel like there isn't enough people with equal amount of passion for supporting them. And that every time for me, looking at everyone making a game around me, I was like, these guys deserve better. This tool is stupid. We can do this so much faster. And then it was just out of necessity of like, no, I cannot just stand by idly and let this happen to these people that I care so much about, that care so much about the thing that I love so much. So it's like a vicious cycle. But yeah, that was the biggest challenge, is how do we make games in a way where we can continue to sustain that exponential growth and complexity without killing the teams and without literally putting everything on the line with every single project, where like if this doesn't ship and make back $100 million that we've invested just in production, then everyone's out of a job. Like that's not a sustainable industry, and these are some of the things that I would love to see fixed.
Yeah, and Daniel, because I'm really interested of how making sounds for a game is technically challenging, because I can understand it is, right? Because you still got a console and to put some amount of sounds in it and has to run smoothly. So do you feel like this is actually really hard than doing different mediums like movies, or it's not that different?
Well, yeah, it is different. First of all, one thing that I should say is thank you for including sound in art.
Well, okay, just to make sure.
That's not a
yeah, exactly.
That's seriously.
Yeah.
Seriously, like walking through an environment without sound,
Yes.
with none of the music and the audio, it is completely lifeless. So it is absolutely crucial. Anyway.
Yeah,
And
yeah, thank you, thank you.
The thing you did also, sorry just to interrupt you, but the thing you did on your talk, because you had this dragon fight, right? And you just include the slides with just the dragon sounds and then the whole together, and the difference was just huge. And that's why, yes, the worlds, believable worlds without sound, it's just nothing.
Yes, that's true, and I mean, in all seriousness, we see artists and people from different disciplines come to us and they say how to enjoy it. So it's not always like that. It's just maybe historically we were a little bit left out. But well, it is. I mean, technically, it kind of depends on the group of people. It kind of depends on the developer. With the recent project with Sony Santa Monica. It's a huge team, so for us the challenge was really just making sure that we know of everything, that there's no surprises for us, that that the tools work for us, and it's really, in terms of creating worlds, I mean, we spent a lot of time, actually, a lot of thought went into making those worlds alive, and there's, like, in my presentation I showed a little bit of that, but it's the environments are pretty thick in terms of sound layers, but they're mixed very low. So there's almost like a subconscious level where you go from place to place. We try to make it very dynamic. So when you go from one place and you move 20 feet, it should sound slightly different, or maybe you hear something in that corner and that corner, and that's kind of, I think, what makes it really interesting. Not making it static, making it interesting. That would be for the environments, yeah.
So we know it's a huge challenge, but we still manage to create games, create big worlds. People are actually immersed in those worlds. But Jason, you guys, with the Destiny, you create tons of different worlds. So can you give us, like, where's the starting process? How do you start thinking about things like you want to create, or where you actually just get this ignition? Okay, we're going to want to do this and that, and how it's going to start.
I think for a very high level, at a macro process, we start looking at the color palette we want to have for a release, like Destiny 1 or Destiny 2. We start identifying the kind of journey we want the player to take, and from that we start extrapolating into locations. And because it's, you're going across a solar system, excuse me, and we want to kind of bring in real science to some of this to an extent, and then we want to, just slather it in fantasy sci-fi and really pull those colors out for the player. So we start with reference, and we start looking at, like, for even D1 on Mars, we were actually looking at real locations on Mars and trying to identify, like, hey, would a city fit here, and why would they do it? And we start kind of dialing in that story. And so for us, it starts at a very broad scale, and then we start basically defining, based on the fiction that's coming in, where the player might go and what that journey may be. I think that answers it, maybe.
Yeah, it does. Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Because you mentioned the color palette, and then it's very similar to us, for us as well. We kind of treat the frequency range in kind of in a similar way, not necessarily maybe planning for it. Like I've seen the God of War, sort of the level color palettes as you go through the story, how it changes. It's really fascinating. So maybe it's not that deliberate, but we still have kind of the same idea of, like, making sure that we kind of fit. This is going to have a little bit more low end. This is going to be more mid frequencies and that kind of stuff. So similarities.
Yeah, guys, you're welcome just to interrupt each other and just make discussion a bit more interesting.
I can just, like, geek out a little bit for a moment, because I absolutely love music. It's something that absolutely freaks me out every time. Is there's so many similarities between music and visual art, because if you look at it, there's 7 notes, like base root notes, and then there's 7 base colors, and then the way you actually construct color palettes are fundamental. Like, say, your ternary color composition, when you go on the color wheel and you go, like, 3 colors, and they have a certain distance from each other that essentially maps to how you can outline a chord musically, and then your warm color tones versus cold color tones would essentially be your major and minor sounds. So the similarities are just uncanny. And I like how a lot of the language translate, like visual rhythm versus sound rhythm. There's so many similarities that it just ties it all together. It just makes it so much more apparent that they're, like, one and the same.
And it also, creates interaction and inspiration. I mean, this is like I said, working with great people and being able to, talk to the environmental artist and kind of just hear him talk about his work and what he's doing and what he's trying to accomplish. It's very inspirational.
Jason, you had on your talk, you had the slide. You said the design is the king, right? Mm-hmm. And this might be, or doesn't need to be, but it might be a tricky for us to create something beautiful, but to follow this design thing, because overall we need to create a game, right? It's not a movie, it's a game. We need to follow certain rules. So how does this work with creating your worlds? Like how big of this is a limit, or how big of this is actually something that you gain upon?
I mean, it's honestly, it's super organic. I was explaining this to someone else today. When I was talking about, I don't know how many people were in the talk, but we have a mass out process, and that's when we're making like really large scale changes. But we're doing that in conjunction with design. We start interfacing with audio usually in architecting, because they don't get a lot from our gray model. Mm-hmm. And I think that, having that constant communication, which communication is key, like true communication, being very honest with each other and working with the design and understanding their needs, and then building the building blocks around that. For example, in Mass Out, you're making the big bets on, hey, I want this, I'm pretty sure this is going to be building, 100%. I know that I want to be able to see this part of the sky over here. Like, you're making really broad strokes, and the design is really kind of trying to figure out like how they're going to fit their encounters in all of that. And as you define and basically chisel away the fat from Mass Out going into architecting, it's really kind of a neat experience to have. Everyone kind of has the aha moment at one time, and that's, again, we start keying in with audio and other groups, and it's kind of this this magical moment where you're all painting together. I should have a slide up there where it's just like a painting with like a million hands, like painting at the same time. It takes a lot of coordination. So.
And Thiago, it's always kind of similar to your work, right? Because right now you're doing Overwatch.
Yeah.
So creating maps is probably even more restricted to this design thing, right, than art. So how does it work from your side?
I think one thing that works really well for us is once the environment team takes the block out from the level designers, we take responsibility for how the map plays in a way as well. So we have a lot of freedom to adjust the design if we see fit. Like we can simplify stuff, we can move things around, and you guys are going to see in my talk tomorrow on Jakarta. I actually changed a lot of the design in one of the areas. Like we are not stuck. Like it's an evolving process. Like we start with a basic idea, but it's like it's never right from the get-go. Like you have to experiment, you have to try, and a lot of times like you try stupid stuff that fails, and you're like, go back, try something else, and you gotta keep moving. But I like that freedom, like to just be able to improve the map as well. Like we're not just stuck to what the level designers did, because a lot of times they don't have a lot of times like their aesthetics vision, it's not the best, Let's just put it this way. Yeah. So we have to change some stuff and also a lot of times, the level designs we take, they are very like broad and abstract. And in Overwatch, we strive to make the worlds very relatable. Like it's every environment you see, like you have to know what it is. Like we don't make like random like rooms. Like we're always like trying to imagine what those places are. Mm-hmm. So that's probably the hardest part, I would say. Like just making them relatable and recognizable.
I just want to say something real fast, because he keyed on something talking about failing, and I think that's super important, that everyone needs to be okay to fail. It's okay to fail, and doing that and knowing when to do that is very, very important. And so, yeah, having those early phases where you just fall on your face over and over again until you get it right, it's totally okay.
That's one of the best things I learned in all my career.
Yep. Yeah. Right, and I would add to that, if the real skill is to fail fast.
Get up even faster, right?
Seriously, like don't spend too much. Like if you want to fail, you want to do it. You don't want to spend 2 weeks on something. You just want to do it in a day. Say fail, okay, that's fine. We're gonna move on. So that's also a balancing act. But you also said something about kind of working out. You're taking work from the designers, and you're able to change stuff and adjust stuff. And one thing to that I want to say is that that only comes if you earn the trust of the designers. And you know, that's kind of something we also have to work for. You know, that's their baby, and we have to understand that sometimes, and be a little bit patient and kind of work with them. And then after a while, if we gain their trust, they're gonna let us change things. They're gonna let us suggest things, but it doesn't happen like right away. So that's just the observation.
Yeah, I totally agree. I would say if you are an environment artist, like definitely take some time to do some level design. Even if you do at home, you know, like get a map editor and make some simple levels, because that's gonna help you work in a simpler way as well. You know, because if we start just with the environments themselves, we not take account into the design and all that stuff, you might end up spending a lot of time trying to make stuff look good, but sometimes, you know, like that stuff just looks good naturally in the end. You know, it just comes together. You know.
And you want to add something? Just like look like that.
There's so much. There's so much to it. No, a bunch of things, I guess. About failing, something that we've got into a habit of doing was actually play test as soon as you freaking can. Like literally slap together something that's like just rough block mesh, and then get absolutely external people to come and play it for you and tell you how bad it is. And they will never tell you actually what you want to hear, but by observing how they play and by observing the things that they pay attention to versus what they don't pay attention to, that's what's going to inform a lot of your decision making, where you'll have a clearer idea of, okay, where did we actually fail and what was actually a happy accident that everybody enjoys. So that would be one. As far as interacting with designers, I think the bigger thing, and honestly the best designers that I've had the pleasure of working with understand that, is that communication should never happen on a very sort of simple level of what needs to be done. It always needs to happen on the level of why something needs to be done. And that's why it's important to do some design yourself, is because when you look at a space, you go, oh, that's why there's a line of sight to there, or that's why this is that wide. And some designers will do that automatically. When they're good at communicating, they'll come to you and they'll go, you know what, here's what I'm trying to achieve with this space. I'm trying to make sure that there is like a pinch point, and then there's like, you get pressure from there, but you need to see there, and then maybe you traverse through here. And if they tell you that, maybe you'll even come up with a better way to do this, and then they'll be happy. They're like, oh, thank you for taking my idea and making it better. But that's what you have to be very aware of, is that when you're building something, you cannot just take something at face value. Whenever they bring something to you, you go, why is it like that? Explain it to me, defend it if you have to, and then that's what will allow me to take your idea and push it even further. So that's the critical part, communication. Always ask people for why.
Yeah, I think, sorry, I'm just going to talk. I think that I've had, I mean, in development, there are pain points for people, and especially between different disciplines. And I think the biggest thing that I've ever done to diffuse it is just to simply ask, what are you trying to achieve? Like, just if you can figure out what they're trying to achieve, everything else goes away, and then you can understand at a base level what they want. So that has always been the best.
So are there like any golden rules? The rules that you need to follow, like checkboxes to when you're trying to create a world or beautiful art? Are there like checkboxes? Go this, go that, do this, do that, and you're gonna end up with something beautiful?
I'd have like one real quick, sorry to like totally counter your question, but I'd say don't have any freaking checkboxes. that would be my biggest one.
And also, sure, go ahead, Diego.
Like before I do any artwork, I do a pass on the whole map, just simplifying stuff. Like before I even know what it's gonna be, you know, like before I even think about art, I'm just like simplifying stuff, making, you know, like dimensions more friendly and moving stuff around. And after that phase is done, then I start thinking of like how it's gonna look like, or just how I'm gonna make it.
I think it's similar with sound, and we sometimes struggle with it. To be honest with you, is the idea that we receive, you know, if the team is sharing assets with us, be it environment or a character, and if it's early on, it's going to change like 10 times. So we have to remember that, so we don't get attached to it and we don't spend too much time working on it. Just do it broad strokes, get it in the game, so everyone can kind of check out and live with it, give us a feedback, and that's something also, you know, we in God of War, we really try to do it because of the scope of the game, not to spend too much time on those first iterations, because it will change, so that's kind of a similar similar thing.
And I want to go to what you just said, because every single one of you, while talking right now, you said like, there's going to be a step back and forth, figuring something out, failing, not failing, trying to do something better. But where is the point of stopping? Because at some point you say like, okay, it's good enough.
There is none. There's none.
Pull your hands away.
Yeah, exactly. It's the gold. When you go in gold, then. Well, I mean, yeah, it's the reality of the game development. At some point you have to put pencil down, and for me, at least personally, the skill I think I've learned over time is to be able to let go certain things, and people that come in that are sort of junior, they're having real difficulty with letting go because they want to make everything perfect, and you just can't. We strive for it. We try to do everything we possibly can, but at some point you have to start looking, big picture, and see it's like, oh, this is actually really great, and that might be one thing there that I could just fix or change some frequency, whatever. But it's not, So letting go is a very important part.
And I thought it sounded like.
No, it's fascinating to me, because something that I actually really cherish about the way Naughty Dog operates is that if something makes the game better, if we're like 3 days away from Gold Master, fuck it, we're gonna do it. And then there's gonna be widespread panic and fear, but if it's worth it, it's worth it. And that's honestly down to the level of like, we've had artists like at 3 in the morning when there's like a few people probably at the studio when it's like just about to ship, but they would like sneak into the level that's locked and they're not supposed to work in, and they'll just fix their shit.
Thanks.
But that's kind of the level of dedication that it totally makes it so much harder for everyone. But I think there's a very distinct difference between minimizing complications and maximizing result. And it's a very fine line to walk, but at some point when you have a group of people that are so passionate about what they do, they will eat the pain and they'll be happy because that is what has allowed them to do their absolute best. And at the end of the day, that's what everyone's there for, hopefully, is to make a game that they will not have to make any excuses for.
So working in games, creating those worlds, those games, as you just said, like creates a lot of stress, and we need to create a lot of content, right? So we have different tools. I just said sometimes those tools are not that good. Sometimes we're trying to make it better. But art-wise, how do you guys feel the few years ahead of us? How they will support us, or maybe even those different tools created using AI or different solutions? Maybe artists, as a human artist, we're going to be disposable. How are you going to see that in a few years? I want to start.
Sure. It's a big question. I don't think we're going to be disposable for a while. I think that for quite some time. I think that the technology that's coming online that is allowing art to be made more quickly and more efficiently is actually going to benefit the players' pockets. I think that there's a lot of stuff. I've had this conversation where every single time a new console comes out that's pushing the limits, that means that the artist and the team has to push the limits, which means we need either more people, bigger budget, longer time, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing, and at some point something's got to give. And so having technology and tools that help alleviate a lot of the pain points, especially like, say, a game like Destiny, if there's something that gives me automation in between the major key points of what I'm trying to build, I'll take it, because that means that we can give you more content for the same amount of money. This is all speculation, but I'm just saying that I don't want anybody like, I'm writing that down. But no, I think there's a great usefulness for it. I'm not scared of it yet. I do think maybe possibly like in the far future that some of that can be automated, but there is something about the human mind and the human ability to be able to really truly comprehend art and know how to deliver that to the viewer. And I think that is a very human thing that I don't know if it can be replicated. Anyway.
For now, at least.
For now.
Yeah, I mean, I would second that, and as for tools, it's that when I was talking about why I like video games and working with video games, that's the balance between being creative and doing technical stuff. And if the tool can allow me to have more time that I can spend on crafting the sound, all is better. You know, there's certain things. So as far as sound creation, I don't see. I mean, I don't see any tool. I mean, there are tools that are helping, but I don't see how it can be replaced with AI. At least at you know at the stage we're right now. So yeah, and I hope.
Everyone hopes here, probably artists, right? And I don't know, like, Thiago, what do you think about that? Like, you feel like your work's gonna be like a magic tool, just one click, done?
Okay, this is my personal opinion. I could be totally wrong, but it's like I see new tools coming out all of the time, and if you are like starting like making art for games now, it can be very daunting, you know, like to, for example, like jump into Substance for texturing. You know, like it's a whole like completely different world, you know, it's like programming and stuff. And sometimes it's easier, for example, like you need to make a brick wall. Sometimes it's easier to just go in Maya, you know, like you make like 3 or 4 bricks, copy paste, you move it around. That might be much easier than trying to do some crazy like node network on Substance. So I think we need to be careful, like just jump into tools as well. Like, oh, there's a new tool, it's gonna make me fast. Yeah, but it might make your workflow more complicated as well. So something to take into account, you know, like never forget the fundamentals, you know, like get the basics right, you know, like know how to make a texture in Photoshop before jump into Substance or Quixel or.
So there's not using tools just because they're there.
Yeah.
Basically. Yeah.
Using it smartly. Andre, I know you're like kicking on this topic very hard, right?
I mean, okay, this is going to require full disclosure. I've recently started a company where we're using artificial intelligence to build tools for artists. So I know a whole lot about this, but one thing I can absolutely tell you is that artistry is not going anywhere. It's not going to be replaced by anything. And as an artist, I'm so freaking excited looking at all of the opportunities that we're getting out of it. But the one thing that I think it's actually going to do, which is fascinating to me, is I think technology is going to make us better artists, and here's why. When you get a new artist today starting to model or texture, you know, they get into Substance. They're like, oh, I got to know all the nodes because that's what texture artist does. Or like, you know, as a modeler, like, yeah, I'm going to sculpt all the things because that's what a modeler does. But it's not. It's just tools. It's like a pencil or watercolors or whatever else. The true value of what you do is in color, is in lighting, is in composition, and how you approach that. How do you infuse that with meaning? How do you pick your subjects? And when you don't have waste years figuring out how to fucking model a thing, when you can offset that and have all of that time, then you're going to start asking yourself, where is the value in what I do? Why are people buying this thing that I've made? And no one's ever going to buy a thing because you made the most perfect UV layout. No one's ever going to buy a thing because your character face has the most badass topology. And fundamentally, nobody should care, and eventually, you shouldn't care too. What you should care is, what am I communicating? And that's what the tools are going to empower you to do. Because when you don't have to worry about all of this, you will actually have the time and room, and most importantly, the attention, not just from yourself, but from the community of the people who are going to be buying your game. Because when everyone can make everything photorealistic, then the fun part starts. Now, how do we stand out? Now, how do we make something beautiful? Now, how do we make something interesting? And this is going to be technology, which is fascinating. But the other part is, it's like, you know, like you chisel out a level from all of the stuff that's not a level. I think technology, in a big way, is going to help us define what is art, because all the things that we will not be able to automate, by definition, will have to be art. Because all of the things that we were able to let go and say, oh yeah, take this away, I don't care, I guess that wasn't art. And in every artist's pipeline, every day that you do, there's probably millions of little things like that you just don't notice because you're so close to it. But when you take a, you know, a mile view from where you are, you go, yes, we don't need that, and we don't need that. And then that's the fascinating part, that the technology is going to be the thing that will actually define art for us. And I'm super looking forward to that.
Awesome, I'm super glad to hear that, because probably our jobs are safe for a few years from now. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. It's actually, we're super fast. I hope we're going to talk a little bit more, hopefully later, after other party. But we got some time left, so I hope you got some questions. So if you want to ask a question right now, this is the time. Don't be shy, please.
Yeah, are you going to come here to the stage, or should I run to you? Okay. First, Brave.
Okay, so actually we were talking about this like technology and making like automating the processes. But what is interesting about technology is actually removing the dependencies. Like, what do you think about that? Like, the current like tools like Unreal, like Unity, like what makes the freedom for the artist, in my opinion, personally, is like you don't have these dependencies. You can like do whatever you want, and like this break between the dev and the art is way smaller than it was.
Can I steal that? I think what you're fundamentally talking about is the democratization of the process. What happens is games are so ridiculously expensive to make, so you get a Naughty Dog game, which is 300 of some of the most brilliant people I've ever met that spend 5 years telling one story. And I can promise you that in that 300 people, there's more stories that we can tell in that same time. And I think what's going to happen is, by removing these dependencies you're talking about, what we're doing is we're empowering individuals to put more of themselves, to tell more of a story with what they do. So then, where before you needed a 200 people team to make a game, at some point you'll just need 2. And what that means is that all of us will have to turn from just someone who makes textures or someone who models meshes to someone who tells a story, to someone who touches people, to someone who has something to say. And that is very exciting. So I think that is 100% going to happen. It's going to take a little while. We're not there entirely. There's a certain quality of game that you can now make with a small team, but you cannot all the way compete to a AAA production. But 20 years from now, very much so.
I'm going to ask you about what you said about letting it go, but my question is that when we shouldn't let it go. Well, for example, I've heard that in God of War there were not many people who were supportive for the camera movement, and afterwards when they played the game it just clicked. And for example, in Witcher 3 Blood and Wine, not many people were supportive for the using of accordion in the music, and it worked in the game. So I will ask you about how to be confident about your artwork, about yourself, about what you do, and how to balance it with directing it with somebody else.
Well, I just very quickly, yeah, I think it's just a fine art to to kind of balance between when to let go and when you really want to push and just dive really deeper and know it's worth it. I think to a certain degree, I think it's the people that you work with. I think we, at least in Santa Monica, we talk to each other a lot and kind of play, listen to this, listen to that. And so there's a lot of feedback that we're getting daily from other sound designers. That kind of helps, I think, because they can tell you, it's like, yeah, this is great, this is awesome. And if 2 sound designers tell you that, it's probably good. And we're very honest about it. So if something is not that awesome and something sucks, then they'll tell us. So I think that kind of teaches you as you go through it and you hear the feedback. It kind of teaches you when when you can let go, and also producers.
I would say
true.
trust
That's actually
your
true.
gut feeling. Like if you're working, it doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. It's more a matter of feeling, until it feels good, and then you can move on.
I'd say real quick, and I think that's important. Honestly, if everybody does their job in production right, might be a polarizing opinion. I don't think there's such thing as sort of a subjective view on what you're doing, because what happens is when the whys are communicated correctly, when you know why you're building it, then it's very simple. If you can articulate how your decisions are reinforcing the why that the company is shooting for, that the project is shooting for, then it's a no-brainer. Like, that's when you defend it, because you go, no, I can actually prove to you step by step how this makes it better, because we all agreed that this is our goal. And then at that point, that's your only marker. You have a conversation, you hash it out, and if somebody can prove to you how something else makes it even better, then you do that.
Yeah, just stepping off of that, saying that we all agree that this is our goal. I mean, that's kind of the philosophy behind the talk that I gave previously. Is like, if you just kind of draw these lines in the sand, you say like, hey, at this point, we all need to have our ideas fleshed out, and so everyone's working towards that. It makes it a lot easier if you kind of understand that. Granted, it's always like, come on, man, I got to put my pencil down. There's always that battle of not wanting to let go, but it helps to have this kind of understanding between groups that have to work together that, hey, we are hitting these areas, and it's all going someplace, and we can still iterate, but then there's a point where it's like, okay, we're now in the muck, it's slowing down, and we have to stop, so.
Yeah, sorry, I'm doing like the no sheriff Naughty Dog mentality of just go until last day, so probably don't do it all the time.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you for the great panel, guys. I had a bit of an off-topic question, but how do you guys feel about curious players that go on breaking your games, breaking your levels, speedrunners that like poke holes in the levels, see the backface culling and all the stuff, hidden triggers? How do you feel about it? Do you feel anything at all?
So my first experience with that was working on, my first title with Bungie was Halo 3. And previously I worked at a smaller studio. No one tried to do that with our games. They were like, I don't care. Working on Halo, I was so distraught the first time someone got out of one of my PvP environments, because those are the most, I mean, PvP or multiplayer environments were like super dear. Like that was all about containment, and more so than the actual regular environments. And when that happened, I was mortified, and they're like, it happens, they're gonna do it. Life finds a way, right? And so I still, I mean, that is kind of the running joke as an environment artist, is like, I'm gonna beat him this time. And then you know that someone's gonna find some weird way to do some ability to then supercharges them to, anyway. I'm kind of over it. So, okay. I mean, I think it's cool. I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, people do speed runs and people that find really clever ways out of the environment. I'm like, holy shit, I want to hire you. Like, that's nuts. And we actually have, at Bungie, we've hired a team of people that are doing exactly that. And they're some of the best of the best. And it's crazy, because I always go and see what they're doing, and I'm like, Jesus, man, I got to go back and do whatever. But yeah, I don't know. It's kind of amusing, but also sad a little bit.
I think it's awesome. It makes my job meaningful, because like sometimes I'm painting a texture, I'm like, yeah, no one's gonna care, but people care about the pixels sometimes. Like that pixel is off, like there's gonna be a post somewhere, like that
Blizzard
picture.
fixed it. Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, we actually started stepping through every one of our trailers frame by frame. It's an actual thing now because, yeah, it's a Reddit post and there's like a shitstorm. Like, oh, look, the ghost thing, their engine is bullshit. So it's fascinating, but you know what? It definitely it makes it very rewarding. The amount of scrutiny that goes into it, because we kind of play with it, because we put so much detail into like, yeah, can they spot that Drake's chest hair is moving in the wind? Like, let's throw it in there, see what happens. Or like the washing machine is jiggling a little bit. Let's see who notices. And there's just like an endless amount of details like that, because it's kind of it's like a game at that point. It's like, let's leave all these little surprises and see who finds what.
And it just speaks to the amount of passion that people have, and I think it's a good way in a way.
Thank you very much.
More questions? I think we have still time for one or maybe two questions. Anybody? Okay.
One more, because everything was so positive. I just wanted to ask one more negative thing. There was never really mentioned like all of you are already on kind of this professional level where you're over it. But what about like burnout, or like you are probably most in the lead positions also, so you manage people. What about burnout in the team? Like, how do you handle that?
I'm going to say from a Bungie perspective, we have a zero crunch policy, so we do not allow crunch. So I didn't make that happen. No, thank you. No, I think that was very important to us. We actually, even as a lead, if I see my guys working late, I question them. Like if I see, I don't mind, because people are passionate, people have something there like, man, I just can't go home till I get this thought out of my head. That's fine. But if I see you doing that for too long, then it's like, hey man, I don't want you to get burned out. I don't want to, I mean, basically it just results in less productivity, and I just don't think that people can maintain that level of creativity if you're killing yourself like that. And so there's a healthy version of that, but it is super spotty when it happens.
Yeah, no, my 2 cents on that would be it's tough. We definitely have not found the balance you guys have. But I think, honestly, the only reason that works somehow and that persists is also, I think, just like there's a why on a project of like, why is the game this way? There's a very much a why for people, like, why are we doing this? And I think we're very lucky to have the kind of people who actually have a passion that is so hard to control for us, that is just, because we don't have producers, we don't have dedicated management. It's all just an absolute free-for-all, but that empowers ownership to a level where you can say, you know what, I really care about this thing. And it will be like, you know, a designer will be like, I really think art-wise this should happen. What can I do to help? Or anyone from anywhere. And that amount of creative exchange just drives people to, A, be more proactive in what they own in the project, but B, also taking the responsibility for that. And so I think that is kind of, for us, that has been the price that we had to pay. But I think fundamentally the reason that that has worked for some people is because they have an intrinsic understanding. Crunch is never mandated at Naughty Dog. That's the one thing that will absolutely never happen. No one will ever tell you to stay late. But people do it because they absolutely believe that they want or need to do this one thing that they want or need to do.
I mean, we still do have crunches, and so. But what I wanted to mention is that I see the kind of the move and the upper management, beginning to understand the effect it has on people's lives. So there is I think this is kind of evolving and changing, and I've seen people burn out a lot, and it's just not not worth it. So I think it's that depending on the studio and the culture of the studio and different places, but I see kind of progress, at least from an environment I work in.
Awesome.
Sometimes I have some mini burnouts. Like when I'm working on a thing for too long. Like I just look at the same thing for like few months. I'm like, yeah, I hate this. I can't look at this anymore. So that's the time that I go for a walk, like on the weekends, like I forget that I work on games and I do random stuff that doesn't have anything to do with games, like meditation and stuff. We have to take care of our mental health as well, just because working games, it can be very, we as artists usually put a lot of pressure in ourselves. We want to make better stuff. We want to get better faster, and that's one thing that burns you out as well. So you got to be careful with that. You got to learn to enjoy the process. Like when you're working, like try not to be overthinking. Like, oh, I'm slow. Like I have this. It's hard to do this, but like if you can do that, you burn out much, like rarely.
Awesome. Thank you, gentlemen, for this panel. I hope you enjoyed that. Again, we got Jason, we got Daniel, Thiago, and Andrew. Thank you so much, guys, for talking about us.